Hi everyone, and welcome to week one, the tracking session. So this session, we're going to be talking about tracking, how to set up and track your users. And there's lots of reasons why you would do this, and we're going to dig into those now. So you need tracking for a lot of reasons. You need to find out your data to measure your return on investment so that you can learn how much you're actually making from your adverts. To better leverage conversion-focused campaign structures. And this is extremely important. This is the kind of core reason, because if you didn't set up your tracking, you could still probably measure a lift on return on investment. If you did nothing different and started paid advertising, you could probably get a sense of how much extra money you're making. But the real gold when it comes to tracking is actually being able to leverage it to find more people who are going to actually take that action. So every time a tracker clocks someone taking an action that is valuable to your business, it's learning more about that person, and therefore by default can better place that advert going forward in front of more people. So it's really important. So again, to leverage conversion focused campaigns, and that ties itself into targeting your audience more effectively. So that's why we do the tracking session first, because if you have this set up, then your targeting becomes a lot easier when you're looking at the audience side of things. So I always recommend to get started with Google Tag Manager. If you're unfamiliar with Google Tag Manager, this is what it looks like. So as you can see in here, there's lots of different tags. Essentially, Google Tag Manager is a one-stop shop for setting up your tracking. If you haven't used it before, you simply go set up an account. And if you're on WordPress, Shopify, those kind of, they all have really nice integrations. It's only a quick Google to set it up. But as you can see here, if you want to set up a new tracker, you can see they're all listed here with the exception of Facebook, which is custom HTML, but all of the others are in here, be it LinkedIn. You can see here the LinkedIn Insight one. I wonder is the Twitter one here as well. Twitter, yes. So all of those, you just select those, pop in the information, and then the tracker is on your website, which is great. You can layer in a little bit more customizable elements into that, but Google Tag Manager for me is like my tracking hub. I find it a fantastic resource for businesses, so I'd highly recommend checking that out. And then you can figure out where you want it to trigger. So tags are essentially your trackers, and then your trigger is when it fires or when it sends information back. You might want it to always send information back, and that would be in the case, for example, of Google Analytics. Every time someone hits your website, you want that information. So that's triggering on all pages. You want it to happen across the board. But you might have more customizable features where you want to have just a little custom event where every time someone hits a thank you page, you want that to go back to Facebook. So you can start targeting, tracking, all of that around finding either more people who are going to take the action of hitting that thank you page, or just get the answer of how many people hit the thank you page from your tracker. So there's a lot to consider when it comes to Google Tag Manager. So when it comes to conversions, this is what it looks like on Google Ads. Very simple. Website, app, phone calls, or import. The phone call ones is pretty interesting on Google Ads in comparison to the other platforms, because what you get the opportunity to do is kind of measure a length of call. So you can say only phone calls, but only if they were more than X amount of seconds. If you already have some tracking set up in your Google Analytics, because Google Ads syncs with all the other platforms quite easily, you can just import them, or you can start setting them up on your website. And as you can see here, just has the use Google Tag Manager option, which is fantastic. You can also install these tags yourself as you go through. Pixel is the exact same. When you're inside in Facebook, you just want to go in, hit set up your pixel, and like that, you can just copy and paste that tracker into Google Tag Manager, exactly how I showed you there in terms of going into custom HTML and getting that triggered on all pages. So digging into Google Tag Manager is important. On Facebook, things have slightly changed. If you're going into your tracking setup for the first time, you do need to verify your domain. So if you go to business settings inside in your Facebook account, you'll see domains here under brand safety, and you have to go through a verification process. If you don't do that, you're going to really struggle with Apple devices. It's one of the key requirements to track on the Apple side of things at the moment. It doesn't really make a massive difference because your numbers are still going to be wrong right now after the iOS 14.5 changes, but that's okay. Still set it up, get everything that you can done right. Even though things are impacted, you still want to get as much as you can out of it. Inside in Facebook, very similar to Google Ads here. Instead of a conversion manager, it's an events manager, which pretty much means the same thing. Once you start seeing the different platforms like this, you'll see that all of this kind of comes together quite nicely. On Facebook, you can still use your Google Tag Manager if you want. You're just using that custom HTML feature. It's probably good to note at this point that sometimes Google and Facebook don't really talk to each other very well. You've probably noticed that if you're running Facebook ads and you have Google Analytics set up, in which case Google Analytics isn't giving you the same information as Facebook. I have a little trick for that later on that we'll talk about in terms of UTM parameters. But for now, on Facebook, you can just set them up using from a website. You can use the conversions API as well. That works really seamlessly on Shopify. It's a very quick and easy setup. But from your website, you can also just, if the Facebook pixel is on the site, you've set it up with Google Tag Manager, then clicking this will actually just bring you to your website, and you can hit on different things and a little pop-up comes up in the corner that allows you to type in the different things you want to track. So it's a really nice way of doing it as well. Basic custom conversions, then inside in Facebook you'll see this little blue circle with a star in it, and that means again just setting up something custom, and that's a nice way to do something quick and easy if it's just hitting a landing page that is the result for you. So for example, you could just call this thank you page and the URL contains thank you, and that's every time someone's booked with you or maybe a lead has come in or something like that. So it's a nice little way to just do it very quickly within the platform. Facebook has slightly changed, it has changed quite a bit since the iOS 14.5 changes. And one of the biggest changes here is in terms of tracking. You'll notice this inside in your events manager. It's called the aggregated event measurement, and you have to configure your web events for that. And essentially what that means is you're prioritizing your events for Apple devices, so that if they take one of those actions that you're looking for, that it is trying to track as many of those as possible, essentially. When you go in, it is important to note that if these are already set up and you wish to make changes to them, that actually your adverts will be paused for 72 hours if you change the order of those. This is kind of for future reference. If you're setting it up for the first time, it doesn't necessarily make a massive difference. But if you are 2 weeks into a campaign, 6 weeks into a campaign, and you need to make a change to your web configuration events in terms of like the priority of those, then you might have an impact here. And as you can see, this is what that prioritization looks like. You're matching purchase first, then add to cart, view content. You're putting your most important one first, essentially, and then working your way backwards. So look at that in terms of your event prioritization. Some platforms are using this. Facebook is, some aren't. Actually, most of them aren't. I think it might just be Facebook and by default Instagram. Every time I reference Facebook, I'm always encapsulating Instagram because it's all working from the same ads manager in the back end. So just to factor that in as well. Adding custom conversions, then you can just select that from the drop down in there as well. So when you're setting that event prioritization, you can choose between the ones you've custom set up or the ones that you have played around with on your website or anything you've brought in from Google Tag Manager. All of those will be available for your prioritization there as well. And the last thing that you really want to think about when it comes to setting up your tracking for the first time is your UTM parameters. And these have become more and more important, especially since the iOS 14.5 changes. So what are they? UTM parameters are tags that you can add to your URL. When someone clicks on that URL, that data is sent back to Google Analytics. And it's important to think about because Google and Facebook don't talk to each other very well. So it gives you a better picture or a better view inside in your analytics. Sometimes, especially with the Apple changes, information isn't being fed back to Facebook accurately, and you may be able to see that inside in your Google Analytics instead, which is great. So these are a couple of links I'd recommend checking out if you want to get started with UTM parameters. The ga-dev-tools.appspot.com/campaign URL builder is a great place to get started, just building it out so that essentially when you go into Google Analytics and you look for the source of where something came from, a conversion event, for example, if you've told it already through the UTM parameter that it was Facebook ads, then it will say Facebook ads in analytics. Whereas if you don't, typically what happens is that social traffic gets marked as direct, and sometimes direct gets marked as referral, and it's all incorrect. Your UTM parameters help clean up that tracking. So that's how you get started with your tracking. First and foremost, dig into Google Tag Manager. Get it on your site. It's the quickest and easiest way to get started. And from there, you can start layering in everything else that you need. When you're thinking about your tracking, think about every touch point along the way. You want to track when someone hits your website, that might just be analytics. Then you want to make sure that someone clicks through to the relevant landing page for a product. Again, that might just be tracked on analytics. Then you want to know, did they click a button? Did they start that form? How far did they get in the form? Is it the end of the form? Did they hit a thank you page? Did they add to cart? Did they purchase? All of these questions that you have about your user on their journey through the website, you want to make sure that you have tracked and is feeding in to the relevant advertising platforms. Now, we'll be talking more about choosing the advertising platforms next week. So as we dig into that, you'll be able to kind of pick and choose what trackers you're going to use. But for now, this is just a foundation to give you an idea into thinking about the different trackers, which ones you're going to need to implement, and how you can go about that process. And the quickest and easiest way typically is adding Google Tag Manager to your site and working through Google Tag Manager to layer in everything else from there. If you have had any questions on this tracking setup, please reach out to me via my email here and let me know. Thanks.